Hi everyone, my name is Simone Rurik and I'm back again with another video. This video is about dressing. Now, every time I talk about dressing, I understand that persons think I'm talking about dressing wounds, which is not so. We are talking about undressing a person that has a weak side. Now, the patient or the resident will be played by a mannequin. Now I have my friend Karabi, and I'm going to be doing some demonstration and explanation, and she will be assisting me. Also, I hope that my skills are informative, and also that you're learning and finding it easier to grasp and to be successful in your exams. Now I'll begin. As usual, we know that they're looking for 5 major things in all the skills that you do, which is infection control, privacy, safety, indirect and direct contact. But also there are other things that they look for in the different skills. Like for dressing now, we have to know which side we are to undress the patient from, because this patient has a special need because they have a weak side. And also on which side we dress them on. So we need to know how to undress them and how to dress them, okay? So now I'll be calling Karabi to stand, and I'll be explaining about the weak side and how you dress and undress this patient. Karabi. Now Karabi has on, she's dressed, she's the patient, and she's dressed. Karabi's left arm is the weak arm. We are acting as if she's lying in the bed and this is her weak arm. So when I'm going to dress Karabi, I will be taking off Karabi's gown that she has on, and her jacket will be her gown right now, so we'll be taking off the gown. So let's do a test. Let's test how this works. This arm cannot move, okay? So if I try to undress her by taking off the gown from this side, I will be having a problem because this side is the weak side and this arm cannot move, right? So we realize now that we cannot undress her from the weak side. So let's try the strong side. This arm is helpful and it can be moved. So let's try undressing her. So I'm going to, okay, Mrs. Jones, let's take off this jacket. And I take it off from this side. She helped me and this was easy. Remember, this side is weak. So now that I took off that side, I'm going to come to the weak side and I'm going to pull the jacket, the gown off her arm. So we understand now that when you are undressing the person, you undress from the strong side. And when we are taking, so let's go again. When we are undressing the person, we take from the strong side first. Then we take the weak side. Now let's do vice versa. We need to dress the patient, okay? Now, say that we're dressing the patient. Let's try the strong side first. So I'm going to dress her. So I'm putting back the gown on. This is the strong arm, okay? So, okay, Mrs. Jones, let's put the jacket, your gown on. So I put on the strong arm. Okay, this is helpful. Now I need to put it on the weak side. Remember, this arm can't move because this arm is the weak side. Now you see the problem? This arm can't move. So we realize that when we're dressing, we cannot dress from the strong side first. All right? So let's try it the other way. Okay, Mrs. Jones? Let's see. So now I'm going to try to dress her from the weak side. Okay, put my arm in the sleeve. Hold her fingers and I pull the jacket up. Now, did you see how easy that went on? So we realize now that this is a bit easier. So we're going to come to this side and we're going to, okay, Mrs. Jones, let's put your arm in the strong side. So Mrs. Jones even helped me. She helped me, and ta-da, she has on her jacket. So we realize that undressing the person, it's best to undressing the person with a weak side, it's best to undress them from the strong side. When we are dressing them, we dress them from the weak side. All right? So that is what we're looking for when we're going to begin dressing. Okay? Thank you, Karabi. The next thing we must remember, in dressing, you must ask the person what they would like to wear. The person has the right to choose what they would like to put on. All right? So we are going to begin the video, and let's go. Good morning, Mrs. Jones. My name is Simone Rugen. This morning I'll be your nursing assistant. Mrs. Jones, I'll be assisting you with dressing. Is that okay with you, Mrs. Jones? Okay, Mrs. Jones, I'll go wash my hands and I'll be right back. Before washing my hands, I'm going to give Mrs. Jones privacy. I'm going to pull the curtain and then I'm going to wash my hands. I wash my hands and I'm back. Now I have to make sure that the person I'm giving the scale on is lying in the bed, and also to hold a conversation to make sure that she's right in her mind and she's not confused. If she's confused, you know, as usual, we tell the nurse. So, Mrs. Jones, may I see your ID bracelet, please? She says yes. Okay, Mrs. Jones, what is your name? What is your date of birth? Thank you, Mrs. Jones. I'll go gather my supplies and we can begin. Now, dressing, okay. As I said before, you have to ask her what she needs to wear. So now is the time I say to her, Mrs. Jones, what would you care to wear? Your pepper shirt and your blue pants? Very good, Mrs. Jones. I'll find them and I'll be back. So for now, I'm going to be using a privacy blanket. Mrs. Jones said she needed her purple shirt, her blue pants, and of course, I need a pair of socks. Ta-da, that's it. Now, the next thing I need is a chuck. I always cover the table or anywhere I'm placing anything on with a chuck. So I place the chuck here. And of course, everything that I'm going to be using right here. The next thing that I'll be doing is to make sure the bed is wounded up to my working height. Okay? So what I'm going to do is to tell Mrs. Jones that, Mrs. Jones, I'll be winding your bed up. So I'm going to be winding the bed up. I come here. What do we always practice? Good body mechanics. It's either I'm stooping like this or I am kneeling on one knee. I'll be stooping like this. Winding the bed up. Lock, lock. The bed is molded up to my working height. And of course, I'll be taking out the mitre. And I'm back here. I have a few friends here and I'm going to ask them a question. Do I need a pair of gloves when I'm doing dressing? No, I don't?
Yes.
Okay. Let's use our sheet to make sure if I need a pair of gloves for dressing. Pardon? So look at your look at the list to make sure if we need a pair of gloves for dressing. Look at what we need. Okay, so we don't need gloves for dressing. You could use your gloves, but it's not called for dressing. So dressing the when we're changing a person's clothes is for me, I'm going to be using a gloves, which we don't really have to use a pair of gloves, but let me explain why. I'll be taking off Mrs. Jones' clothing. Maybe it's dirty, maybe it's not. It's not for us to judge. But if you are doing dressing also, you don't have to use a glove because it's not required on our list. I never saw it and it's not required on our list. But guess what? If I'm logically thinking about it, I'm going to use a glove, all right? But that makes it very hard to manage the clothing that we're going to be doing, and that does not mean if it wasn't asked for, required, you don't add it. But you can't lose points for wearing a gloves, all right? You understand what I'm saying? So I'm wearing a gloves because logically speaking, you would not like to be messing with dirty and you're not covered, all right? So let's wear a gloves. So the next thing I'll be doing is to put on the privacy blanket. So I'm going to put on the privacy blanket. Okay, Mrs. Jones, how was your day today? Okay. You went walking. I saw you walking, Mrs. Jones, and that's wonderful when you're exercising. Okay. The next thing I'll be doing is to take down I'm taking down the top covers and I'm taking it to the bottom of her feet. Now, I'll be putting on Mrs. Jones' pants. After taking down the top sheet, I'm putting on her pants. So I know that when I'm putting on the pants, I want it to be put on as easily as possible. So I lay it out on the front of the bed, find out where the front of the pants is, and of course, this is how I lay it out on the bed. The next thing I'm going to do is to put my hand, roll up the foot of the pants, put my hand in it like this. When I'm dressing from the far side. And of course, I'm dressing under the privacy blanket. Notice that my hand is in the foot because when I put the pants over there, I'm going to be touching the toes. So I want my hands, the pants, to be directly over the toes. So I'll be holding the toes and pulling up the pants, okay? So what I do is to put the pants under the privacy blanket like this. And I'm going to hold the foot and I'm going to pull up the pants, okay? That's all. But let me show you what I mean when I do this. See, my hand is right here holding the foot and it's right there already, all right? And I pull it up. Pull it up, make sure it's up on this leg. And of course, this is how it looks under there. It's his left leg is already in the pants. Now I'm going to do it over for the right. The same procedure. I'm going to put my hand inside the foot of the pants and I'm going to hold the toes and I'm going to pull the pants up. Make sure the pants is over there. Now look at me. This is how it is under the covers already. It already has the pants on it. Now, I want to pull up the pants fully on Mr. Jones. So Mrs. Jones, I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do is to cross the arms and legs and I'm going to turn her and pull up the side of the pants. And I'll do the same for both sides, all right? So now, Mrs. Jones, I'll be crossing your arms and legs. So I cross the arms and I told her I'll be crossing the legs. And I will be turning Mrs. Jones under the covers like this. 1, 2, 3. On the count of 3, Mrs. Jones, I'll be turning you. 1, 2, 3. And of course, notice that the towel falls, the privacy blanket falls, so she's not exposed. And I pull this side up. And that side is up. Okay, Mrs. Jones, on the count of 3, lay back down, uncross the arms and cross the legs, and I'm back to this side. The same thing I do for this one side, I'll do for the other. Okay, Mrs. Jones, let's cross the arms and legs. And I'm going to be pulling the pants up. 1, 2, turning you on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Turn, Mrs. Jones. And of course, I'm pulling the pants up. So, Mrs. Jones' pants is up, and I'm going to uncross the arms, uncross the legs. Now, let's see what is happening under the cover. Let's see if the pants is up. Mrs. Jones' pants is up, all right? So we're going to be continuing. It's not fixed perfectly as yet, but it will. Now, what I'm doing right now is just to make sure Mrs. Jones' pants is settled. It is up, so I'm just fixing it so that it's straightened out properly on her. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to put on Mrs. Jones' shirt. Remember, we said she has a weak arm, and the arm is on the left. Now, we worked it out that it's best to undress on the strong side, okay? So I'll be standing here because the right side is the strong side. But before we do all of this, we must raise the head of the bed. Okay, let's go. Mrs. Jones, I'll be raising the head of your bed because I need to raise to get as much help as possible because she has a weak side. So I'm going to be raising the head of the bed. As I said before, guys, notice my cowbell is always under the pillow, so I know exactly where to find it when I'm ready, all right? So now that I've raised the head of the bed, I'm going to try to take off Mrs. Jones' gown. All right, look at me. Look at this now. So I'm taking off the gown. I will be placing my left, come Karabi, come help me again, please. Come here. When this is Karabi is Mrs. Jones for me today, okay? When I raise the head of the bed and I want to lift Mrs. Jones up or to pull the back of her gown. So this is how I do it. I put my left hand under her shoulder. I pull her up with my right hand and I open the gown with my left hand. And then I place her back to lay back down. All right, guys? So this is what I'm going to be doing. Thank you. I place my hand under the shoulder, lift her like this, and pull the gown. But before I do that, this is what I'm going to do. Mrs. Jones, I'll be taking your gown off now. So guys, to make sure I don't expose Mrs. Jones, this is what I do. Place my hand under the shoulder, lift her with my right hand, make sure I hold the privacy blanket on her shoulder over from the left side, pull it over, and then I pull the gown. All right? So the privacy blanket did not go down. All right, guys? Now, I'm going to undress her. This is a strong side I'm undressing. Okay, Mrs. Jones, let's take off your gown. Remember, this side is okay, and Mrs. Jones can help me to take down her gown. Take off her gown. So her arm is out. I push the gown over to the weak side. And then I go to the weak side and I finish taking off the gown. When I'm taking off the gown, I make sure I hold the hand like this and I pull the gown down. Push my hand here, pull the gown down, and the gown is off. Now I take away the gown from Mrs. Jones. even when I'm taking off the gown, I make sure the privacy blanket is intact, all right? It's not falling down and exposing Mrs. Jones. So I'm rolling away the gown now to put it in the basket, the dirty basket. Now, we worked out that it is easier to dress the person on the weak side. So I must take the shirt now and go to the weak side. Mrs. Jones, let's continue with putting your shirt on. So I open the shirt out on the bed. I never, guys, I never do this. Never. We never take linen, clothes, or anything and do this. She'll be shaking it because particles do fly. We open, we take our time, lay it out on the bed, and we open it. Now, I open the shirt and I know that this side is going to go on the right side and this is for the left. So I'm going to make sure, put the shirt like this, and make sure I'm holding the hand, the side that I need to begin with, okay? So I'm going to put my hand in the cuff of the shirt and put it right up like this. Make sure I hold Mrs. Jones' hand like this, and I'm going to simply pull up the shirt on her arm like this. That's all there is to it. And ta-da, her hand is inside the shirt. Now I'm going to continue. What I like to do is to place the shirt over the privacy blanket. All right, guys? Now, I told you how to lift the person by placing a hand under and bringing the person forward with the next hand. All right? So I'm going to do the same thing. When I do it, when I lift Mrs. Jones, I'm going to make sure also that when I do this, like put the hand under here, lift her, I hold here and make sure it doesn't slide down, okay? So let's go ahead. Mrs. Jones, I'm going to lift you on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Place my hand under the shoulder, lift her a little, hold her, hold this so it doesn't fly, and expose her, and I put the shirt to the back while I'm straightening the back of the shirt. Understood? Now I put Mrs. Jones on the count of 3. I'll be putting you back to lay back down. 1, 2, 3, and she's back down. Now I'm going to continue. So I'm on the weak side. I'm on the strong side. So now I'm going to continue. I come here. Mrs. Jones, I'll be lifting you again. 1, 2, 3. And lifting just to make sure the shirt is straightened at the back. And I put her back to lay down. And I'm going to be dressing the strong side. Now, it's the same procedure. I'm going to put my hand in the cuff of the sleeve. And I'm also going to be helping Mrs. Jones put her hand inside the shirt. Remember, guys, even though this is a strong side, if it was a real person, she would help me much better. This is a mannequin, so you'll see me fighting a little to help to put her hand in. Okay, Mrs. Jones, let's put your hand in the shirt. Very good. And that's Mrs. Jones, yay! So now, Mrs. Jones is dressed in her shirt. Now, this is what I do. I'm going to begin buttoning Mrs. Jones' shirt. So, I'm going to make sure that the privacy blanket is is not tucked behind her. So I make sure that is okay. I'm going to button the very first button of the shirt. And I button. And I button straight down. Straight down. Guys, even though I say I button straight down, I'm not really buttoning everything right now. But you're supposed to close the entire shirt, okay? And you close the shirt and you make sure that Mrs. Jones is looking all that dandy in her clothes. And of course, the privacy blanket is right there. And their shirt is buttoned. There's no bugging up at the back of her shirt. You need it to be very smooth, okay? The next thing that happens is that you're going to make sure you put on Mrs. Jones' socks. When you're putting on the socks, you dress from the far side. When you put on the socks, you ought to make sure the heel is where it should be and the toes, the socks is smooth over the toes, okay? So I'm going to be putting on the socks. So I take the socks and I put it on this foot first. And then I take the other one, I put on this foot next. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is to make sure, okay, Mrs. Jones, I'm putting up your top covers. Same procedure, taking down your privacy blanket. You make sure the privacy blanket is over to the side that it's good. You're going to throw it. Okay, Mrs. Jones. So now, I'm seeing that Mrs. Jones is sliding down. It's not, you can tell her that you're pulling her up or whatever, but remember, this is an exam. So you have to talk to Mrs. Jones, and of course, the examiner will know that she slid down, right? So I'm going to just tell her, Mrs. Jones, I'll be pulling you up because you're sliding down on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. And I pull her up just to make sure. And of course, I'm pulling over the privacy blanket over to that side. And I'm going to be taking it down. Remember, when we take in the privacy blanket, we're rolling it away, and we're also making sure that it's rolled properly and not falling, hanging down. So I make sure it's rolled properly. And of course, I'll be making Mrs. Jones covers back. Now, guys, remember, Mrs. Jones is dressed. When someone is dressed, what is the best solution for them now that Mrs. Jones changed her clothes, she's well dressed, and she's lying down? What should I do to Mrs. Jones? Should I put her back to lay down? Or is it best to ask her what she'd like to do, like how she's well dressed and maybe she wants to see other people and stuff like that?
Yeah, ask her.
The best thing is to ask Mrs. Jones what she would like to do, okay? And of course, when I ask her, she's going to say she'd rather to sit up and see stuff, okay? So I'm making sure Mrs. Jones' sheet is fixed. Giving Mrs. Jones some toe space. And of course, I'm going to say to her, I'm just making sure she's nice and dandy. Remember, Mrs. Jones is dressed and she's okay and she wants to. Okay, Mrs. Jones. She wants to see everything. So you make sure her bed is neat and stuff. And of course, I'm going to be giving Mrs. Jones her privacy, her call bell and such as soon as I do this. But remember, every time you finish working on the bed, what do? You wind it down to make sure she's in the lowest position. Mrs. Jones, I'll be winding your bed down. Come here. Good body mechanics. Wind down. Lock, lock. The next thing I'll be doing is taking away the garbage. And of course, I took away the garbage, and Mrs. Jones is sitting up in bed, and I need to ask Mrs. Jones, what would you care to do? Would you care to stay like this in the bed, or should I put you down, back to lay down? Mrs. Jones is always going to say, I want to stay up. I want to be seated like this. And I say, okay, Mrs. Jones, here is your call bell. Feel free to call me if you need anything. Undo the privacy. I open back the curtain. Because Mrs. Jones is well dressed. She needs people to see that she's looking fine, all right? So, Mrs. Jones, is up. Mrs. Jones. Don't mind me, guys. I'm just, you know, trying to play it as real as possible. She'll be looking outside, not to the wall, alright? So, Mrs. Jones, I'll be turning your head a little. That's okay. And I am finished. Open the curtains and stuff. And I'm going to wash my hands, okay? So, when I come here, I take off my gloves. Pinch it, pull it down. 2 fingers, roll over, and throw it in the garbage. Wash my hands, come back here, look around, my skill is finished. Notice, guy, in the end, I went and turned her head. That's not in the video. Please make sure you turn her head before to make it more natural, because she should not be looking at the wall. She should be looking outside, okay? All right. I hope this skill, I did it like step by step for you to understand. All right? When you're doing it, it's not as long as I'm doing it. It's just because I'm talking a lot in it. Because I want you to understand the reason why certain things is being done. All right? So I hope this video was informative. And guys, when you watch the video, I hope you like, subscribe, and also share. Whoop whoop, another video was made.